Welcome to the Soulfull Sound podcast, where you will find conscious, inspiring content to support your healing and transformation. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I want to extend a heartfelt invitation for you to be part of our community, where more insightful conversations await to guide you to heal, grow, and thrive. Simply click the subscribe button. It means the world to me. Your support, your comments, everything is truly incredible. And we're only at the beginning of this awesome journey together. I'm so excited to be on this adventure with you, and your subscription is a valuable part of making it all happen. Thank you so much for joining, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are. Welcome back. Welcome to our new listeners to the Soulfull Sound podcast. I am joined by the wonderful Kim Chestney, who is the author of the Illumination Code, Radical Intuition, and the Psychic Workshop. As the founder of Intuition Lab and the Create Festival, her work raises awareness about the importance of insight in the evolution of individual and world consciousness. Welcome, 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 Kim. Amazing.
Thank you so much for having me, Simone. It's such a pleasure to be here today.
That is so beautiful. Now, as I said to you prior to hitting record, I've just been so excited about all of your work and intuition, one of my favorite topics, and the way you go about it is so interesting. But before we delve into kind of like the nitty-gritty of the book and the things that you're bringing out, I'd love to know a little bit about your personal story. What got you interested in this in the first place that brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I think our stories are a really important part of the journey when we look back on our life and how did we get here? And intuition is one of those things that it takes us to unexpected places, and we end up in places we never imagined. And I never thought I'd be here talking about this, but this is the way that life led me. And so for me, I think my journey and my passion for intuition started as a young child when I had experienced things that sort of didn't fit in with the known laws of physics then. And back then they're like, oh, that wasn't possible. You were just imagining things, right? That's what they, told us a lot in the old days. And even when we're young. But then as you get older and these things continue to happen, you say, well, you know what? I really need to find an explanation. So it really became a lifelong passion for me to understand these things. And it led me into this road of intuition through working in technology, through working in the arts. I end up here in this place where intuition is a part of all of it. Ultimately, Our intuition is just infused in everything we do. So that was the real big discovery for me, is how important intuition is for our future as human beings, as we learn to balance the way we think and understand life.
Yeah. Beautiful. And what would you say is your definition of intuition? Because I know that's a word that's thrown about a lot these days. Use your intuition, tap into your intuition. What is intuition?
Yes. And my last book, Radical Intuition, I set out to answer that very question, because we're working with, in technology, you hear people talking about intuition. In spirituality, you hear people talking about intuition. Well, how does it have so many different manifestations, right? So for me, the source intuition that really feeds all these different manifestations of intuition, whether it's creativity or genius, all of these things that are tied into our intuitive self, the source is that our intuition is connected to that quote unquote inner wisdom that is held in the field that connects us all, the oneness, the universal connection that stores all wisdom and information. So when we think with our intuition, we sort of start to think with that higher part of ourself, the higher part, the deeper part of ourself that has access to information beyond this moment in time and space. So It's something a little bit magical, but also it's implicit, and every single person has it. And we all just use it in different ways based on our own wiring and passions and the way that we go about life.
Yeah.
Do you feel called to use your voice and sound in a healing capacity? Learn how to use your voice therapeutically to facilitate healing and well-being. Whether you want to go deeper in your own healing journey or facilitate others in theirs, this training is for you. This online training runs over 5 weekends and offers theory, practice, resources, and support on your path to becoming a qualified sound healer. and for your personal healing journey.
Yeah, and I love that you tapped into this unified feel, because for me, when I always think about intuition and when I talk about it with my children and the things that we explore, it is really tapping into that and recognizing that it's almost like tuning into your favorite radio station. It's playing whether you tune in or not. But if you tune into the frequency, then there's so much available for us to access. So I really love that you spoke about that particular piece. Well, your book, The Illumination Code, I mean, that's a really interesting title in itself. So what is the Illumination Code?
Right.
And how would you say that it relates to this unified field or quantum intelligence? Because you talk quite a lot about that in your work as well.
Yeah, so that's the big question, and what is the idea of an illumination code? So for me, writing this book, after I wrote Radical Intuition, and we figured out all the different ways that intuition is actually working in our lives and all these ways we can develop it, the big question was, well, how does it actually work, right? Like, what's really going on behind the scenes when I have a sudden like knowing, or I think about a friend and they call me on the phone, like, well, how is that actually possible, right? Are there little like spirits whispering in our ears, or like, there's so many different like things that we've come up with over the course of history to explain this. But now, finally, within the last 100 years, the quantum revolution has shown us that all of these things are explained scientifically, right? Things like entanglement, for instance, are really big ideas that we're connected through this unified field, through our thoughts. We live in a world that's made of consciousness. So of course, we're going to be able to consciously connect with each other on a deeper level. So really drilling down and doing the research, some really interesting scientists that are exploring this field, like Urban Laszlo, Jude Curvin, talking about how the intuition, I mean, the universe is built of information, right? And so when we get down to the bottom of it all, we're like, atoms aren't the smallest things anymore. There's things that are smaller. What are these small particles made of? Well, at the end of the day, they're realizing that everything's made of information. So what does that mean? That means information can be read by a part of our minds. So this code, this illuminating code that the universe is built on, right? And like you said, it's always out there. It's always running. It's always broadcasting. Our intuition can tune into that code and learn from it and be informed by it, so that we can make decisions from a place of truth and clarity, instead of, from our little worlds of limited information.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so with that in mind, what are some of the things, because I know a lot of people listening will have a lot of different experiences around this. So how can we kind of notice some of those, whether we call it signs or synchronicities or, magical happenings moment to moment, where we are somewhat being connecting with that field, and just to kind of get the downloads and the messages, how can we start to be aware and tap into those things?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that answer that I think are really important. The first thing is really just slowing down. And I think, the presence mindfulness movement has shown us how important it is for us to create space in our lives, and open space for our mental health, and for just to be happy and to be grounded. But it's more than that, because when we slow down and open space, we open space for our intuition to come in. Part of the reason we're so disconnected from our intuition is we're so busy and we have so much noise in our head that those subtle drop-ins, those subtle downloads just get missed or pushed aside, or just can't get through all the static. So the first thing is really for us to create a culture in our life of what I call insightfulness, just opening space and listening and allowing ourselves to be informed. And this is the second part, by the thoughts, feelings, and ideas, impressions that arrive out of nowhere. So this is the hallmark of your intuition, is things you notice out of the blue, right? It's in the outside world, signs, synchronicities, that you just happen to look at the clock at 11:11 every day, right? That's your intuition, right? Or you just happen to be just riding your bike and you have this idea, I should call my mom, and then you call your mom and you find out that she's having a really bad day and just needed to hear from you, right? So it all happens because we don't generate our intuition, right? We're not thinking about our intuition. We don't think it up. It just comes to us and we just receive it. So in order to receive it, we have to have more space to allow that to happen. And then just start looking for those things. Now you can notice, like, oh, something pops into your head. Well, I wasn't thinking about that. Why did that come to mind? It might be your intuition. It's a good sign that it's something
Yeah.
that you should listen to.
Beautiful. Now, I know a lot of the work that you do is an inward journey. Listening to the words that you used just now about the intuition coming to us or us being aware of it, how do you speak about it from a perspective of it being a part of us, part of us, as you said, the whole unified field, something that we have access to in terms of that, again, coming back to physics or coming back to the energy systems, if you get what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting ways of looking at it is that, we are all living in this beautiful universe of vibration, of energy, information, light. And, there's really no such thing as matter. We understand that, physical form is really just a form of information that's been built out of energy. And, we know E equals MC squared. But more importantly, with this idea of having these illuminating codes of the universe broadcasting everywhere in this beautiful sea of wisdom, it interpenetrates our body, right? Because it's not just outside of us or inside of us. So the inner journey is sort of a misnomer because there's no real inner and outer. It's just a relative point of consciousness that we're at, right? But it is the inner journey in that it's a deepening. And we understand that all of this wisdom that we have access to, this guiding information, is interpenetrating our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our eternal being, right? So in Radical Intuition, I talk about the 4 sort of pathways of intuition. And that's how, that's the way it really started to make sense to me to understand the way that we receive it. We receive it as it interpenetrates our body. We feel things with our bodies. We eat intuitively, right? You want to eat something appeals to you. It doesn't appeal to you. That's an intuitive act, right? So you're very much connected, gut feelings, things like that. We use our minds for intuition. We make decisions. We use our inner guidance. We have knowingness. Like we just have ways of sensing things and making choices with our intuition. And our hearts, hearts are so big with intuition. We follow our heart. We feel resonance with people. We feel intuitive connections and feelings and empathy. Right. And then ultimately, intuition is our connection at the end of the day to our spirit, our eternal spirit, that ever-present, undying, eternal part of ourselves that connects us through the mystical realms and all those beautiful transcendental experiences that go beyond this physical world that we are using our senses to perceive right now.
Yeah, I love the holistic description of that, because I often find that when intuition is spoken about, it's like it's not part of your mind, it's your gut, or it's not this, or it's that. But that kind of holistic mind, body, spirit, heart, yummy. My senses are jumping and dancing to that because I resonate very, very deeply with it.
And I love that you use the word holistic, because I originally that's what I was calling it. I'm like, it's holistic intuition, because that's what intuition is. It's everything, right? And I get that a lot too. People are like, oh no, it's against your head. I'm like, no, it's part of that. You want it to inform your mind. It's so important, right? Ultimately, we want to balance both sides of our brain, right? The thinking mind, and the intuitive mind. And
that's amazing. So I know that in your book, it's kind of built around these 7 illumination keys, and the first one unlocks the gateway to our quantum dimension. So what is the quantum dimension? And can you talk about how that impacts our lives, how that quantum dimension impacts our lives?
Yeah. So, part of the recent discoveries, I think, really of where we're going ultimately with the intersection of physics and consciousness exploration, the end result, once we accept that we live in a world that is built of consciousness, the next step really is to understand that our intuition is our way of interfacing with that consciousness, right? So our intuition really becomes a key to understanding and personally experiencing the quantum world. To me, the big revelation of writing this book is that intuition is a quantum phenomenon, right? And when we understand that we are using our quantum intelligence when we think with our intuition, that the whole sort of perception of what we can and can't do with our minds is expanded, right? The limits are changed. And so, every time we participate or have one of these extraordinary experiences, like we have a premonition and it comes through, right? It comes true in the end. That's a quantum experience. We were able to tap into the sort of timeless field of everything, that eternal memory of the universe where all that information is stored, because everything that's happening is happening in the eternal now. There really is no future and there is no past. So it's actually, in quantum physics, quite possible to remember things in the future, like we would remember something in the past.
Right. That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of, those are the kind of experiences, things like remote viewing. You know, the governments all around the world have supported that because it works and because pretty much anyone can do it. You know, we do it in Intuition Lab, my school, and everyone's shocked that they can do these things because it's part of how we're wired. We can tap into information that isn't locally around us because of this unified non-local field where everything is stored. So yes, so this kind of, the book really gives you opportunities through these keys to personally experience and practice and witness these things, so you feel the quantum dimension at work in your own life.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask you, you kind of touched on it. So kind of a segue here. I wanted to ask you about like the human construct of time and how we view things, past, present, and future. So in the case of the way you've just described it, when we talk about alternate realities, what is, it's not necessarily time travel, but what can you speak about in that way? Because if it's not the way we perceive time in the human construct. So tell me a bit more about the alternate realities.
Yeah, the alternate realities is a really fascinating idea. And it's really what allows us to recognize that we don't live in a predestined world, right? So if there's no such thing as time, you might be tempted to think that, oh, everything's going to happen one singular way and we don't really have free will and we're just playing our part. But the reality is, when we look at the multiverse, and that there's sort of a fractal of different choices and different realities that come with every choice we make. So it becomes a sort of time of a kind of parallel time travel when you think of tapping into these alternate realities, which you can do with your intuition. And Peter Smith, who wrote the foreword to my book, does some really great work with alternate realities, and we've done some stuff together that was pretty amazing. So there's ways that you can sort of tap into different paths, that you might have taken, and look at different outcomes while recognizing that we live in a world where everything's happened in some sense, but it's also free will, and we still get to choose and create our own destiny.
Yeah, what I love about what I've been reading is, we hear about psychics or prophets or, Nostradamus, prophesies this and these things are coming true and so many years ago. And for me, it's really interesting how you break it down from that scientific perspective. And so there's a question for me around that. So if the universe then holds all the information, it's all accessible to us all, how can we, on a day-to-day or however basis, tap into that and access more of it? Because I think people can relate to those, I felt like I should call my friend, and you pick up the phone and call your friend. How can we tap into it more and access it more?
Yeah, and that's the most important question. It's important that we understand everything and get a concept of how it works, but at the end of the day, we really want to be able to open up and use that interconnection to elevate our lives, to elevate other people's lives, to make the world better, to bring people together. And those are all things that intuition wants to do. Intuition is the great unifier, and it's our best friend, right? It wants us to achieve the highest version of our life, be our best selves, and really heal as a planet on all levels. So yeah. It really is the most important question. So, it starts with very simple acts at home, just like, the saying goes, the real change starts within and at home. And it starts with learning to listen to your intuition in those very small moments in your life, paying attention to the thoughts that arise out of nowhere. Getting into a good high vibe space is important too, because it's really hard to access our intuition when we're down, when we're stressed out, when we're sort of having all that friction in our lives. So trying to put our own mental health, our physical health first, so that we are in a place of peace and power, because those are the energies that we align with when we tap into our intuition, right? It's sort of stored in that upper vibration of high vibe. The stuff that's lower energy stuff is we don't want to connect with that. It's not really intuition. It's just, byproducts of living in a physical world. So it's important that we take care of ourselves and we listen and we open up and start making those small decisions with our intuition and learning to trust it, because then we can start to trust it with the bigger things.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I have this with some of my really inner circle, and I do my best to, I suppose, train or certainly guide is a better word, my children in that way, that when they come and they say, I knew I should have done this, or I didn't listen to my intuition, and they start to say these things where they recognize there was something that came up. They acted in a way that wasn't in aligned, and gosh, they could see that if they had only just. And those kind of like hindsight moments. How important is it for us as individuals, as a reflection of each other, to validate that intuition? If someone comes to me and says, I'm really sensing that this is this and that, and it's true, how is it important for me to honor that? Because for me, it's really of utmost importance. And how does that shape things, if it does at all?
Yeah, I mean, those moments, validation is really key, I think. And I build validation into everything I do with all my work, because we really need to know when our intuition is right or when it's not right, right? That's how we fail forward. That's how we learn, right? So those times when you didn't follow your intuition in life are some of the greatest teachers, right? Because having that sense that like, oh, the universe was talking to me. Yeah. Like I missed it. And if I would have listened, right? So it's so important that we validate each other in those times, and also that we validate ourselves. So that's part of the insight cards that we talked about. I have online, there's a free insight card deck. Anybody can try these out if they want, at kimchestney.com. But so the idea is that these cards, when you pull them, give you little validations, whether you see an object on them that relates to something you're doing, or the card speaks to you in a certain way. So I actually created that practice to help us to get validation of our own intuition so we can learn to trust it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's why I started with that before jumping on our call. I thought, well, look, I'm going to do something simple and just set myself up intuitively even for this conversation. Let's see what comes up. And it was interesting that the card that I picked up, there were so many really vivid symbols and signs on it. And my eyes wanted to go to the space.
Interesting.
Which I thought was really interesting. And then I went into focusing on the things that were there. So I'm really curious to kind of delve back into that afterwards and see what comes up.
Yeah, and it's really it's so fascinating, because your intuition, and why cards work so great for this is because that intuitive side of your mind works through metaphor, symbolism, poetry, all those creative things that we were kind of conditioned out of as we grew up a little bit, right? The arts and everything. So that's its language. It doesn't speak as clearly and linearly as our sort of rational mind does. So the idea behind the cards came from an ancient practice called sacred seeing that was done actually in the church for centuries in the medieval times, when people would look at pictures and let the pictures speak to them through sacred images. And it's the same concept. You look at these things and you open up and it starts to speak to you with a language, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, beautiful. I love oracle cards and tarot cards and all those things for that reason. Just see what wants to pop and what wants to come through the intuition. Now, in your book, you talk about, and this is really important for me to bring up, because I think that people listening, this is a big part. You say in the book that the source of all suffering is the illusion of separation from our inner dimension. Can you talk more on that?
Yeah, that is important. So once you start to connect with your intuition and recognize that you are continually living in the loving embrace of the universe, it helps you to realize that we aren't as alone as we think we are. I think many of us feel separated, isolated. I think this is part of being mind heavy. We're so much reliant on our ego self, our thinking mind, thinking we got it all figured out, we can do it ourselves, that we've forgotten about this connectedness that's intrinsic in all of us, in this beautiful patchwork quilt of human beings that make up humanity. So it's really about, when we touch into our intuition, we're touching into reconnecting to the whole part of ourselves, and the part of ourselves that's one with everybody else. And that in itself is healing.
Yes.
We're not alone. We are not doing it on our own. We are always supported in some way, invisibly, even if we can't recognize it. So it is very comforting. And to know that that comfort is supported by science. It's not just woo woo. These aren't just
Yeah,
words
yeah.
anymore. It's
Yep.
actually the way it is.
Yes, beautiful. And I think that in that there is embedded for me this sense of responsibility. And if we have that connectedness and we're aware of this, then we can choose. We have a choice. And I know that that's something that is we speak about this a lot in my field of sound healing, of understanding suffering and understanding it, just noticing it as dissonance or disharmony, and being able to bring ourselves back into that resonance and back into the harmony, or frequency that supports our highest good, our health, our well-being, and so on. So I find it so beautiful the way that's been phrased. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that a bit more. Now,
Yeah.
with this, you're talking phenomenon and dimension and quantum, and I love these words. I want to talk about reality. Because in the book, you speak about this invisible realm that you call the meta reality, and that this exists beyond our material reality. So is this higher reality, or this meta reality, the real world, and we're living in a different one? Or is this where our intuition comes from? I have a lot of questions around that. Talk to me a bit first about the meta reality.
Yes. So this is a really fascinating concept too, because and it really sort of started when I went down the rabbit hole of the holographic universe, right? So if you've folks listening have read anything about the holographic universe, it's really it's still theoretical physics, but it's built on, again, on this idea that the whole world is running on information, which is actually carried by light. So that really, at the end of the day, when we're sitting here in this world, and just think about our bodies, right? We take our bodies for granted. We have 5 senses, which are just basically sensors, right? So it's like with a robot, they have sensors. Well, we're like beings with sensors. So we can only sense what we can pick up with our sensors. So this reality was built to be experienced by our sensors, and most likely, so understanding meta reality, it's not something that's like up there in the sky, right?
Yeah.
It's all around us. It's just we're not built to perceive that while we're in this body, right? So it's happening within and around us, this meta reality. Our reality is I look at it as kind of being like a sub reality of the greater reality, that we're sort of localized. It literally localized, right? Because it's a localized time and space. We're individual, we're local, and we have this beautiful experience of being able to experience the world as a separate thing, right? Like if we were all one and we have the oneness, well, we come here and we're able to step out of it and look back at ourselves and see ourselves, right, from this individual place. So this reality is not a bad thing, right? Because people are like, oh, we got to get out of this reality. Everything's horrible. I mean, there's bad things that happen here, but the idea of it is really beautiful too, to have this sort of localized experience, but not to get caught up in it, because it's not all there is, right? It's like the concept of Maya, right? It's this little illusion that we're living in, our little, I don't want to say simulation, but it's kind of like a simulation, a little sort of holographic reality that is the physical world. And there's something beautiful beyond it. And who knows what's beyond that? I don't know that our brains can conceive of that fully. But we do know, there's many people that have experienced it. We've intuitively experienced the things that are within and around us that aren't able to be picked up by the 5 senses, but are still there and are still offering us hope for all of the magical things that can be infiltrated in this world.
Wonderful. And so would you then say that it's about bringing our sensors more online, and perhaps being open to having more sensors that we have not naturally tapped into? It's an interesting one.
I love that. I love that. Bring your sensors online, 100%, right? So we have to think, I think we're evolving. I think we're here and we are just at the beginning. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. Humanity is still trying to figure out what we're capable of, right? And what we don't even use a whole lot of this intuitive mind. There's so much untapped potential when we tap into that sort of dimension of our being. And I think that eventually we're going to look back and say, oh, okay, so we figured out there's more we can do with these bodies and with our minds than we realized. when we're not limiting ourselves, and there's maybe even societal forces that are conditioning us to not free our minds and not do those things. So I do think there is a beautiful opportunity now with the rise of intuition, the rise of the quantum revolution. All of these things are coming together, even the feminine power that's coming in, because all of it's connected to that sort of receptivity, that side of our being that we haven't expressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, the human beings or human race would be the QI. And then now we have the AI, right? We have quantum intelligence. So
that's QI. I like it.
Yeah, we're the QI. Now, I didn't even think to ask about AI, but as you're talking about these things very much from a construct, and these the words that you're using very much programmed and so on, I'm curious as to your take on AI right now, if there's anything you might want to share based on what you've been doing.
Yeah, I've wrestled with this idea on many occasions too. And I come from my background in tech, so I've worked with a lot of companies that create AI, and I think it's very fascinating. I really feel like the moment that AI to me is really going to be alive is the moment it has intuition. Right. And I mean intuition, not like programmed intuition, right? So,
Yes.
So the difference between like the AI that we're dealing with now is it's really still just operating on how we program and then sort of riffing off of that based on their programmed algorithms. But when that AI has some sort of interconnection to their creator or to the field of everything that's outside of a cord, you know what I mean? Then it's then it's going to be another conversation. So
yeah, for sure. No, we'll have to see about the name AI after that. But yes,
exactly.
So we spoke a lot about this unified field and looking at how things are interconnected. So, and I kind of brought up these synchronicities and psychic and all of these things. So for those of us who kind of wonder about, because I love talking about psychic and channeling and all of these amazing things. So wondering how it really works, that psychic ability when someone says I'm psychic. So yes. I know that your book really offers a scientific explanation around that. So can you speak to that? And then the second half of that question, I'll bring it once you've spoken to
Remind me if I don't get to it.
Yeah, I'll bring the second half after. So the first one was really about the scientific explanation of that psychic ability.
Yeah. So think about it in the old days, say 150 years ago, if someone was able to do, mediumships, psychic stuff, saw the future, palm reading, all this stuff, right? So back then we had no choice but to say it was supernatural, right? It's all talking to the spirits. It's all of this sort of occult explanation for things we didn't understand. So it became very taboo.
Yeah.
And especially with, the institutions that sort of dominated our culture, they were afraid of it. They wanted to repress it because, it was powerful in some ways because, some ways, it was real and effective. And so we fear what we don't understand. And I think there was a lot of that has happened throughout the history with intuitive manifestation, is we just didn't understand it, so we were afraid of it. But now that's one of the reasons that I try to be a voice in the world for intuition like this, because we do understand it now, and it's something that we should not fear. It is something that we should 100% embrace and learn to trust, because our intuition wants nothing in the world wants more good for us than our intuition, right? So if something is scary or makes you feel bad or is like something negative, that's not your intuition. That's probably some sort of ego thing happening or something else, right? So it's so important to understand that shift and start to respect these kinds of happenings and make sense of them in a way that's not occult or looked at as scary, right? Because I've had people come to my class like, I'm afraid, that of my intuition, people have taught me that it's scary and that I'm going to get possessed and things like that, right? That's not the intuition we're talking about, right? That's a whole different thing. So really intuitive living is basically shows us that psychic ability is normal. It's natural. And it's a byproduct of our the growth and expansion of our consciousness.
Yeah, and I know in my own journey, I grew up with a mother who was heavily into metaphysics and
Mm,
spirituality, and I was very fortunate and very grateful for that upbringing. And I questioned a lot of things, and every time I asked her something, she would tell me to look within. She wouldn't point me necessarily to a book, or she wouldn't tell me to believe this. It was always this going in and asking the questions and then coming out, and those were the kind of conversations we had. But one of the things that I find interesting about this is there were times, and I wouldn't even say that long ago in my life, as I have different experiences continuing to happen, that I
mhm,
would think, what's going on? This is like, it's almost as like, this surprising. How can I possibly, or going
mhm,
into that place and then realizing in hindsight, I remembered when that was the same. I remembered
mhm.
when being able to really get in connection with my guides or whatever. It felt like, what is this? And now it's the norm. And then there's another level, another layer that comes in, and I'm like, wow, and oh yeah, just another one of those.
Right.
So you kind of start to recognize those cycles. And I think it's really precious. So I want to know if there's anything that you may have experienced personally that's been that kind of, I don't
Mm.
know, for what many people I'm sure would be mind blowing, that you feel called to share.
Oh, so much, so much.
I can imagine.
That's
I
another
can
podcast.
imagine, Kim. A whole
Um,
different episode. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's part of what continued to fuel my fire is these things
Yeah.
started happening. And but to your point, when I was younger, as a young woman, when they really started to really make an impression on me, it was jolting, it was confusing, it was
Mhm.
something I really had to work to make sense of. But now this kind of stuff happens all the time, and it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
part of I've integrated into my life in a way that it's so supportive and really nurturing to my spiritual growth. So it really does sort of change the way that you live in reality when you start to work with this kind of work and recognize the magic that's everywhere. Even it's
Yeah.
little signs and synchronicities, all these little ways the universe talks to you and reinforces that the magic of the universe, that there is something deeper happening, right? Don't get so caught up in these little things that drive us crazy every day, because this is just a little part of something much, much greater. And this work can just infiltrate our lives with some of that magic.
Yeah, that's beautiful. No, I can imagine that it would be a whole podcast on the what
Haunted houses, from haunted houses to spiritual awakenings,
right.
you name it. I've
And
it's I've had it all.
yeah, oh, that's so beautiful. I love it. I love it. So when we talk again, just coming back to this, time as we know it, the human construct of time is not, time, future, present, past is not what we think. So if everything that has happened or will happen or is happening right now is, it's all connected and moving, then
Mhm.
when people talk about their lives being predestined, like this is my destiny, this is my fate, I have no choice here, this is what I came here to do. I wonder your thoughts about that piece, because that's a really interesting one for me.
Yeah, and I do think there's a lot to unpack with that too,
Of
because I
course.
feel like sometimes we are born with a calling, right? We feel like we are called to do something. I think that's part of how our intuition works through our heart, through our interests and our passions, and through that creative energy. We feel like, oh, you have a calling to write a book, or you just have a calling to share your talent with the world. And I think that's very deeply ingrained in intuition and is part of being in the natural flow of walking your highest path. But when people get too rigid with that and really are like, this is this is my way, and if you don't remain open to that flow, and because life is always takes us in places that we don't expect. We might think we
Yeah.
have a calling to write a book because we're going to be international bestsellers, and that's our destiny, but really maybe we're just called to write a book because of that one person that's going to read it, that is going to go and do something that completely changes the world in a way we can't understand, right? So we can't question our intuition. That's why I always tell people, we just follow your intuition on that next step forward, that
Mm,
little prompt, that little nudge of where do I go from here? Especially like when we're in ruts or we have creative blocks, our intuition is always there just to take us on that next step, because it doesn't show us the shiny dangly object at the end. Like, It's not a goal, right? It's intuitive, and our lives are always changing based on our decisions, right? So it's a fluid process. So the key, I think, to following our intuition is just being present in the moment and taking that small next step by trusting ourselves and that inner calling and that sort of guidance that's pushing us through our heart and our mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how do we do this in a very practical way in life when, the I'm sure you've heard the expression, God laughs when we make plans kind of thing. But we obviously we're doing things in a very practical way in this dimension. We have a business, or we have a job, or we have a family, and we make plans. So how do we dance with the intuition when we're making our plans and we have things that we have to set and get in place, and then the intuition and dance between those two? Because I know, understand living moment by moment, yet there is a space to create and make plans. So speak to that piece of it.
Yes, and I love the way you describe it, because I feel like a dance is the perfect analogy, right? Because it is a back and forth, it is a flowing, it is an aligning with vibrations, almost like a musical sort of connection with the flow of life. And I think what you just said is a reflection of really the ultimate state that we want to get to as human beings. We don't want to just be in our heads all the time, just overthinking and over planning and over controlling, but we also don't want to just be in our intuition and just be like out in outer space, flying around, right? Like neither one of those things is good on their own, right? So the key is to think with both sides of our brain, to balance both of these energies and the yin and the yang, and to find a way to be structured but also fluid, right? It's that old sort of contradiction. It's we have to be both at the same time, and that's where the beauty of the complementary nature of things creates the ideal state. So being open to our intuition, but also using our really smart brains to serve that intuition, right? So intuition is that first thing. It comes in first. It's that knowing, that feeling. And then we have these great rational minds that can help us to work with that and apply it to the world.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, great. I like that. I really I relate. So I love the way you've explained it. I'm just dancing at everything actually, which is lovely, a lovely feeling. So another very practical question, because I love when my guests that listen ask very practical questions. And how do we know when it is our intuition that we're sensing, hearing, and all of that, as opposed to internal dialogue that will come from a different from our unconscious mind, or old patterns, or whatever, or not necessarily even old, but patterns of behavior? How do we distinguish so that someone says, this is my intuition that's telling me don't cross the road right now, or come this way, or whatever it might be?
Exactly. And that's really one of the fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves when we start to develop our intuitions, because if we're going to trust our intuition, we have to know it's actually our intuition, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of voices in our head. That's the other thing. Everyone's like, listen to the voice in your head. Well, it'd be great. Sure. If there was just one, that'd be easy, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of voices in our head, right?
That's it.
Right. And not all of them have our best interest in mind. I mean, think of how so many of us, you look in the mirror and there's a voice in our head that's saying, oh, you don't look quite right. Like you need to look this way or that way. That's not your intuition. That's a different voice. So the key is to figure out that one true voice of your guiding, loving, supportive intuition. And I have a whole checklist in both books. I think I included, it's in Radical Intuition and the Illumination Code, of these characteristics of genuine intuition versus characteristics of non-intuition, because that is really fundamental. So one of the things, so I'll just highlight that a little bit, just so folks who are listening and start to use that in their life, is understanding that first, intuition always comes from a place of still, calm, peace, and power, right? So even if it's motivating you to do something powerful, it still comes from a place of calm, right? So it's really important that we differentiate that from our emotions, right? So intuition can be emotive. It can call us to do something. Like if you have a feeling suddenly that your child needs you somewhere out playing, you can be moved to go and check on that child, right? But 9 times out of 10, when you do that, you're moved from a place of power, where you're not just sitting around having like, oh, and feelings and emotions. No, you're like, I'm going, I'm moved. I don't know what's happened, but I'm going, I'm checking on this kid, right? So you're moved with power. So intuition never is going to be something that brings like fears, anxieties. All of those things are related to our ego, our right, our own sort of survival, right? So if there's fear and anxiety around it, it's likely not your intuition, right? Because even if your intuition is telling you something that you might not want to hear, right? It's not going to do something by making you feel smaller, because intuition ultimately empowers you, right? So that's really key to remember. So if you're having a bad day and your inner voice is saying mean things to you, that's not your intuition. Your intuition might tell you to go a different direction, but it's going to empower you to go in a different direction. So anything that makes you feel small, bad, diminished, that's coming from your thinking brain, your inner critic, your ego mind, all of that stuff. Your intuition is something that no matter which direction you're going, it's not going to tell you everything's in the universe is like just how you want it to be, but it's going to empower you to take your best path. So that's a really key difference in those inner thoughts, and just recognizing also intuition is something that abides. It doesn't flip-flop and change and go a different million things. Like emotions, they change, they go away. But if you have a real intuition, it'll just stay there. It'll stay with you. You don't call your mom and your intuition wants you to call your mom. You're still going to get that other ping, that little nudge, the whisper, shout, roar concept, right? We've heard that.
I love it.
Right? That's your intuition. It's whispering and you can listen. If you don't listen, it's going to yell a little louder. And if you still don't listen, and like some calamity is going to make you listen to get your attention. And so that's intuition. If it's honest intuition, it sticks with you until you recognize it.
I love that. Empowered. That's such a beautiful word. I know what for me has been interesting, because in my journey of really building that relationship with my intuition, anytime I had those moments, for example, I don't know, I will say maybe a few years ago, lying in bed and something says, get up and go check that you've locked the door. So I'm not afraid, I'm not scared or anything, but something tells me get up and go and check the door. So I get up and I go and I check the door, and the door's locked, everything's fine. So I go back to bed. The next night it happens again. And I'm like, hang on a second. I went yesterday and I checked the door and it was locked, it was fine. But when I got up that time, I realized that there was then some fear or anxiety that came up the second time, because I'm like, why has this come up again? So for me, it's interesting, because the practice that I now have is, if I notice a bit of fear or anxiety coming up with that internal dialogue, that might be the intuition, might be something else, I often say, if I'm not grounded, so ground myself. If I'm ungrounded, I could get clumsy. So I know that about myself. I ground myself. And as soon as I get to that place of being grounded and centered, which is what you spoke about before with slowing down and being mindful, everything shifts. So I always aim to get to that state in those moments of connecting in with whatever that the intuitive download or voice might be in that moment.
I love that. And, I think that's a really great practice. And I'm going to actually mention that to people when they talk to me about it, because it really is about, you can notice that actual shift, right? And then you can actually get into that place of saying, okay, so now it's all clear. How do I feel? And we can do that, check in with yourself. And your story reminds me of one of the stories I told in the book, like when, I actually had a peeping Tom outside my window, and I had no sense of anything. So one night I came home and my roommates were playing chess, and I went into my bedroom to change clothes. And for some reason, this is the idea of, I was talking about, your intuition catches your attention out of the blue, or it comes out of nowhere. I just had the thought to go over. I saw that the curtains were a little askew, and I noticed it. I was like, oh, I should just go and close those curtains. Didn't think anything of it. And I went over and I closed those curtains, and there was a knock on my door. And I was like, what? And I opened the door, and this guy was like playing it off. I was a fire escape. Like I was on the third story, and he was playing it off like he said his like mat there or something. And I was like, it's, what are you doing? And ended up turning out, called the cops, and there was a peeping Tom, like everyone had been reporting him. But my intuition, right? Just that little thought, go over and close that curtain. Right. And I wasn't thinking about it at all. Right. So then So, it'll inform you whether you're in that state or not. So, I mean, really being in that calm, quiet, and just trusting that your intuition is going to be there for you, is really a better way to process all that information. And then we tend to get all in the emotion zone when we're like, oh, is there something I should be afraid of? And this and that. And once we catch ourselves doing that, we're already in our head,
And
right?
yeah,
So
completely.
we're in our head. So
yeah, we've already shifted that state. Yeah, that's it.
yep.
Love that. And with I work in in sound healing, and I train people to be sound healers. And I often get that question because we do study the science and understand what's happening in the energies field and the energy system and all of this. And then we also then talk about the intuition, because it's not just the science that's going to say, now sing this note for this and sing this note for that. Everyone is different. And we go into this space, this intuitive space. So when people ask me, well, look, I've got these thoughts in my head, they're coming up. How do I know if they're right?
Right.
How do I know if they're right? And my response for me, because in my own practice, has always been, well, first of all, it's just information. It's not about being right or being wrong.
Love that.
But what if it is? As opposed to doubting it, it's just information. You're just sharing information, and it will either resonate or it won't, whether that's with you or with your client if you choose to share it. So I really love the way you've really kind of delved really deep into these things, because I do work with intuition a lot, but I don't speak about it a lot, and certainly not as in the way that you do. But I'm so turned on by your work, because it really speaks to what feels embodied when it comes to intuition for me in many ways.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you're naturally using it with it, as a creative person, especially with music. Like, I think music is such a beautiful way to align and manifest the intuitive energy into this world. And so much comes through that. Like, I am not a musician, but I am a deep appreciator of music, because I think it really is one of the deepest connections to that sacred part of ourselves. So understanding that, especially creatives and artists, like we are the one sort of segment of society that are actually actively using our intuition all the time, and it's okay, right? It's like that's part of the process. You can't do creative things without intuition. But it's really built in a natural process. But once you start to become aware of it, right, and how it's actually working, you can take it to the next level.
That's beautiful. I love that. What is the next level?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I think the next level is really using intuition in all we do. So in living from a place of clarity and truth, and not living our lives like so many of us live, in confusion and stress and anxiety and focused on the wrong things. But our intuition will lead us to that sort of everyday enlightenment, that illumination that can help us live with peace and happiness and well-being for our bodies and our hearts and our minds. So the whole kit and caboodle.
Whole shebang.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think, just speaking a little bit to the world of social media and the generations of people, what we have access to now, because I talk about this with my children, and not even necessarily social media, even, great teachers who share insights from their experience and their knowledge and their research and so on. There's so much information overload. So, I have three beautiful children, and one of them in particular, he's very intuitive, naturally, I think, from very young. They all are, but he brings things to me in a very specific way that I can sense he's curating something interesting in himself. And he often asks the question, like, well, I've heard this, I've heard this, I've heard this, I've heard this. So how do I know? I mean, it's all good information. How do I know which one is true? And now I've seen in a lot of your work, and I love that, truth is within you. You've written that a lot. I see it a lot in your work. So speak to truth is within you, because this is what I often say is, like, the truth.
Yes.
And also, there's a part of you that knows what's true for you, because it's not a cookie cutter approach. So I'd love to hear more about truth is within you.
Yes. And it is such an important concept in today's culture, where we're just inundated by information and different points of view and fake news, and who knows, what's really going on behind the scenes. We live in a world where untruth is a thing, right?
Yes.
And we can't trust this five senses to show us everything. So I really think it comes down to one simple idea, which is the idea of resonance. And that's the old saying goes, you know the truth by the way it feels, right? And you brought that word up earlier, but it really is fundamental to using your intuition and what resonates with you, what doesn't resonate with you. You can, when at the end of the day, say, you meet, I use this analogy a lot. You meet someone new that you've never met before, and they look great. Oh, they've got all the right clothes on, they've got the great job, they know the right people, but something inside you doesn't like it. Something inside you feels off, right? That's that part of you that knows everything, right? So your intuition is the part of you that knows everything, right? Our regular old minds, we just know what we come into contact with locally in this place and time, and that we are confronted with. But the part of us that knows everything sees past that. And it moves us and informs us through feelings of resonance, sometimes through knowingnesses too, but very deeply through resonance. So if something doesn't resonate with you, if someone's telling you something and it doesn't feel right, it's really important that we honor that and give that a voice, so that we, it can save our lives even, there's many stories of that.
Yes, for sure. And talking about, the things that we experience, how much do you think we store? As energy beings, we're fluid, we're not rigid, but of course, like they're the Akashic records, there's our unconscious mind and memories. And how much do we store? Talk about the storage within our system.
Yeah, I mean, the universe is all about storage, right? The Akashic field, the quantum field, it's the memory of the universe. It's stored there. Everything's non-local. I think it comes down to this concept of entanglement. Like we store locally, like almost like a hard drive. The universe is the cloud that's out there. And then we have these local hard drives, and we store locally what we're entangled with. That's the energy, the people, the feelings that we're still holding on to, the experiences that we're still holding on to. We have a choice to let things go. If we want to let things go, we can, or sometimes we have to hold on to them because they're part of our lives and we're confronted with them. But ultimately, it comes down to how we stay emotionally, mentally, or physically entangled with energy. But the good thing about that is that you can disentangle if there's something that you don't want to carry around anymore wholeheartedly. You can release that, and it's gone, at least from your personal experience in this world.
Yeah, I love the very simple hard drive and cloud. That's such a beautiful way to look at it. So in that case, maybe you don't want 5 TB of storage. Keep it small and leave the rest in the cloud.
I love that. Yes, I want just a small storage, and I'll live clean, simple.
Keep cleaning it, recycle, all of that beautiful stuff.
Yeah, because we do. So release it, send it out to the universe, recycle that energy, send it somewhere else, right? Just keep what we need. That's beautiful.
That's it. And talking about quantum intelligence, why is it so important for humanity and our future?
For me, I think it really is I say the inner frontier is the new frontier. And I really feel like that's the place that discovery awaits us. I think there's so many answers to the mysteries of the human experience can be found there. I think that our growth as beings, as living creatures, is found there. That's where our future really lies. There's so much potential to be unlocked by looking at this inner, deeper dimension within us. And the result for that, I think, ultimately is going to be a more unified, connected humanity, because that's what's there. It's connection. It's love. Like let's bring in the word love into the conversation. It's coherent, right? So the universe isn't made up. We think we're separate, like circling back to our conversation earlier about that disconnection, but that's an illusion. Underneath all this disconnection is coherence, and coherence is like the scientific word for love. It's what unites us and connects us. So beautiful things wait in there, not things that we should be afraid of or repress.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I know that you cover so much in your book, so it might be hard to choose, but if there's one big takeaway that you wish for people to kind of, when they read your book, like, I really want people to understand this or experience this, or whatever words feel right for you, what would that be from reading your book?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I kind of wanted this book to be a handbook for rediscovering the magic and wonder of life, realizing that there's so much more to this reality than everyday, the physical things that we come into contact. There is imbued with wonder and meaning, and you can personally experience those things. This book has exercises, practices, experiments, tons of them, like 50 of them, so
Oh,
many
yay.
for you to like applied and
Yes.
personally experience that magic and wonder so that we all feel more alive and connected.
That's amazing. And can you talk a little bit about Intuition Labs? Because this is your space and you've created
Yeah.
this so that people can come in and go visit. Tell us about Intuition Labs.
Yeah, it's a global school, so we have students from all over the world. We've been officially active since 2017. We've been exploring, practicing, researching intuition. It's really informed a lot of the work that have come out in the last two books, but ultimately it's a place for us to come together and practice our intuition, to give each other validations like we talked about, and really start to learn to trust our intuition. So we work together, a lot of live workshops where we get that live practice, which I think is so important when you're developing your intuition. But there's also lots of teachings and things you can watch and learn there. So, but it's a really fun, intuitive exploration community.
That's so beautiful. Well, I mean, we could talk forever because
I
this
know.
topic is just like such a joy for me. And I'm just so honored to be able to hear these things from you, to feel the embodiment and the depth of the work that you're doing, which I think is so important. So I really thank you and just celebrate you helping us as human beings to expand our minds and fulfill our potential, because it's so needed. It's so important. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for having me and for being a voice of all these beautiful things we need more of in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, before we wrap up, of course, I'm going to put all of your links and all your yummy stuff under this episode for everyone to check out. I like to ask my guests one final question, and that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? A self-prayer or desire that you wish upon the world right now?
I wish that all people of the world come together in the beauty and wonder and magic that is implicit in all beings.
Oh.
Mm.
Yummy, yummy, yummy. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining. I really appreciate you.
Thank you too.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Your support, your comments, and everything is truly incredible, and we're only at the beginning of this awesome journey together. If you love this episode, hit that like and subscribe button and make sure to check out our other episodes. Thanks so much for being with us today, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.